As we know, food insecurity in Lincoln County across the state of Maine is a tremendous problem. And we have significant changes coming through H.R. 1, the big beautiful bill that we're going to talk about tonight. And we need to talk about the implications of that, not only here locally, but statewide. We have some data up here for you, which is statewide data, and some of it is Lincoln County data. But what we do know is that $29 million a month would come out of the SNAP budget. And when I think about that, I think about our small grocery store across the street, because that employs a lot of people. And a lot of those people are local people and they have families. And when we start thinking about the ways in which people aren't going to get fed, and people are not going to have SNAP benefits potentially, we also are going to have an impact to our local economy when we're not putting as much money into our grocery stores. And we're definitely not going to be putting as much money into our small mom and pop convenience stores. You live in some parts of Maine and some parts of Lincoln County where it's not very convenient to drive all the way to Hannaford to get a gallon of milk. But if you live in Washington, Maine, you might have to go to a convenience store rather than driving all the way into Waldoboro to get a gallon of milk. And we have to think about those larger systemic frameworks around what it means when we start peeling money out of our economy. So on one level, it's about jobs, it's about workforce, it's about farmers, it's about production. And on the other, it's the direct impact to children, to older persons, and to families in this state who will not have enough to put food on their tables. So we're going to cover a lot of details about that tonight and data. And we're fortunate to have the Speaker of the House here who's going to detail his bill. And hopefully we'll be able to bring his bill forward and address some of these dramatic cuts to critical food security in our state and in this county and in this town.
So the layout for tonight is we're going to have a panel of experts who are going to give you the hard data and the rule changes of what is coming down the pike for us. Then we will go over new legislation that the speaker is able to tell us a little bit more about. And then after that, this is a town hall. This is about hearing what you need, your ideas, your questions, your comments, because this is going to be a challenge for all of us. And people at the state level need to know your ideas and your concerns in order for us to do our best work.
And lastly, I just want to say, as the director of the Community Resource Council, which is an agency here in Boothbay, we cover Boothbay Harbor, Southport, and Edgecombe. And we run 8 programs to help our neighbors in need. And 2 of those programs are feeding programs. We run Food for Thought, which we deliver to children's homes on Friday to help them with food insecurity over the weekends. And we bulk out for long weekends and school vacations. We also run a 24/7 food pantry, the Community Fridge. To all of you out there who have contributed to that Community Fridge, that's what it's all about. Our motto, like other community fridges, is leave what you can, take what you need. And people do every single day in this community and 24 hours a day. We're a small town. People go in the middle of the night. Why do they go? Because we have attached so much stigma and shame to not having enough to eat. So we work really hard to reduce that stigma and shame. And I also wanted to mention another partner that's here in the room. We have Chief Doug Snyder, who is our chief of police, and our police department. They've also helped me carry food from Hannaford to the Community Fridge. We get Hannaford food donated on weekends and on Mondays and Wednesdays, and it helps us to feed our whole community. But I just want to acknowledge the chief for being here tonight and thank him. Now we're going to turn it over.
Turn it over to me.
Okay.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rep. Stover, Senator Rennie. Good evening, everybody. My name is Scott Carter. I'm President and Chief Strategy Officer of Conduit Government Relations and a resident of Augusta. I moved here in 2021. Best move I ever made in my entire life, without a doubt. I came here from the swamp known as DC. Have been working on food and nutrition issues since 2007. Where I was Chief of Government Affairs at USDA's Food Nutrition Service, so a lot of information and a lot of work on the food system. So we hope we provide a bunch of information tonight. There has been a lot of changes in SNAP, as you all know. They do impact individuals and organizations, and we have a group of people tonight that are going to explain exactly what's going on. First, I want to introduce Lizbeth Silverman. Lizbeth is the former head of USDA's Food Nutrition Service Northeast Regional Office that oversaw the state of Maine. She's now retired. and doing consulting work as well, and is one of the most foremost SNAP experts in the country. So Elizabeth, let me have you come up and give us some information.
Good evening, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. I am going to walk us through the changes that have come about through the HR1 legislation, but before I do that, would like to give you some data points for the discussion that I think would be helpful. This gives you sort of the lay of the land across the country in terms of the SNAP population and how it measures up. So in the state of Maine, about somewhere between 12 and 14% of the population are SNAP participants. That is just about the average for the country. Approximately 12.3% of the population across the country receives SNAP. There's 42 million people that are participating in the program, and the average benefit is about $188 per person per month, which comes out to be about $6 a day. Some people get more, some people get less, but that gives you a sense of the scope of these benefits. Getting into the changes, probably the one that is most dramatic is the funding changes that are coming about as a result of the bill. So just to, again, go back to the basic program, it's an entitlement program. That means that anybody who is eligible for the program gets the benefit. It's not like a block grant where you hear about a confined amount of money. This is an entitlement, so if you meet the eligibility criteria, you get the benefit that you're entitled to based on the federal guidelines. The federal government sets the broad guidelines. States have a chance to select options, but it's largely a federal program. Also, the federal government has oversight responsibilities, but the states are the ones that administer it. So there can be different options and the way that people access the program that are different from state to state. Prior to the changes in HR1, the SNAP benefits were 100% funded by the federal government, and the administrative costs were 50% federal, 50% state. So that brings us to the first set of changes. Beginning in October of 2027, there will be changes to who is responsible for the benefit costs. If a state has an error rate that is below 6%, they won't have any additional responsibility to pay for these benefits. If their error rate is over 6%, their share of the benefits could be anywhere from 5 to 15%. So that's a big deal. That's a big change. And I'm going to talk about error rates in a minute just so you understand what that's tied to. But there's also a couple of other funding changes. One is that the administrative costs would be a larger responsibility for the state. As of October of this year, they will have to pay 75% of costs instead of the 50-50 match previously. And then back in October of 2025, they eliminated the nutrition education program. So there's no more services in that space. So I just want to talk a little bit about error rates so people understand what we're talking about here. The SNAP program has a very large responsibility around quality control. The error rate is a way to measure whether people are getting the benefits that they're entitled to. So it looks at over-issuances, under-issuances. It's not a fraud rate. It's not tied to an intentional program violation. It's simply the accuracy of the benefits that are being delivered to households. And so in this legislation, you're going to, the state is going to be tied to what their error rate is. And I will mention that right now, the most recent error rate for Maine is over 10%. So there are big implications here. And I kind of talked about this already. There's going to be, for the state, there's going to be less federal funding, potentially, at least on the admin costs, regardless of the error rate. And there's possibly going to be changes to how the state chooses to administer the program to improve their error rate. So it's really important that recipients understand, what their responsibilities are, how they can continue benefits. It's important to be informed and to know what those new potential verification requirements are going to be, or any other kind of documentation that they need to provide to the state to make sure their benefits are continuing. And we don't know exactly what the state's going to do at this point, but it's just important to stay aware of any changes that they make to the operation of the program. There's also several other provisions that went into effect as of November 1st. This one is really more of an annual change, but the first is that there will be limits to reevaluation of the Thrifty Food Plan. That is a long way of saying what the benefit levels are set at. It's currently tied to the dietary guidelines, and those are now going to be, those incremental annual changes will be tied more to a COLA change rather than changes to how people purchase or the kinds of foods that are considered in that basket of foods. It's also limiting the connection between SNAP and LIHEAP. So what does that mean? Well, there is a program that states run related to heating and cooling costs, and this was an automatic way for somebody who's getting SNAP to qualify for a heating and cooling deduction, a standard utility deduction. It's an administrative ease. It doesn't mean that you won't get that anymore, but it does mean that additional documentation, the state can't just take the fact that you're getting LIHEAP as a reason to now give you this standard deduction. They're going to have to require additional information to show that you actually have these expenses. So again, more administration is what we're seeing here. And then they eliminated internet charges as a deductible expense for SNAP. There were also changes to non-citizens and who can get benefits in the immigrant space. SNAP has never been a program at the federal level where illegal entrants can get benefits. However, they have changed the non-citizen requirements in a way that is more restrictive. So it's going to be a narrower group of applicants who are eligible to receive SNAP. So these are real technical terms. The immigration policy is extremely complex. So these are statuses that people have: lawfully admitted for permanent residence, Cuban and Haitian entrants, or those that live and work in the U.S. under the Compact of Free Association. And that takes us to work requirements. I think this is one of the key changes that I would like to highlight today, because it does really expand who is responsible for work requirements in the program. It did a couple of things. It changes the age range for ABOD work requirements to those between 18 and 64. That adds about 10 years to who's required to comply. Previously, it was 53 as the top cap. It also changes the exemption for having a dependent to only those that are under 14. So previously, it was if you had somebody under the age of 18 living in the household, that was a reason to get an exemption. That is no longer the case. It also removes several temporary exemptions that were there that were sort of categorically took people out of the work requirements. So those that were homeless, those that were veterans, those that are age 24 or under and were aging out of childcare, It doesn't mean that you wouldn't still qualify for an exemption, but you're not going to qualify simply for that reason. It would be things like you're unfit for work, you have a disability, things like that, where you're going to have to provide additional documentation. But these statuses alone, just being a veteran alone, is not going to be a reason to be exempt from the work requirements. It did add in some exceptions that are new. Indians, urban Indians, California Indians, and other Indians who are eligible for the Indian Health Service. And then one other change that makes this provision more likely to be in place across the country is it limited the ABOD waivers to only be permissible when the area in a state is over 10% unemployment. Previously, states could seek a waiver if they were able to show lack of sufficient jobs, which is an easier test to meet.
Could you give us the definition of ABOD?
Yes, yes. So it's able-bodied adults without dependents, which doesn't really apply anymore because it's kind of changed the definition, but that's the way it's still referred to in the law. So some states have come up with other names, but it's essentially those that are between 18 and 64 and are not exempt for one of the reasons that's allowable: disability, pregnancy, unfit for work. Those are a few of the categories where you could be an exception to the work requirements. And what this is a time-limited requirement. So it means that within a 36-month period, you can get benefits for 3 months without working, or you can meet the requirement and get it for longer. But if somebody is not working, they can only receive benefits for 3 months before they are terminated from the program. Go ahead, Scott.
Nope, we're ready to go.
Are you ready? Okay.
Yeah, I think we're going to move to Sarah.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. And as y'all can see, there's many changes. They're also very technical. So if you are a SNAP individual who is receiving SNAP, if you know a family or a friend or others who are receiving SNAP or thinking of applying for SNAP, please let them know, to go to the state website. It's a good website. Look up the information and take the time to really see if they're eligible. A lot of changes have happened, and so I want to let you know that specifically on the veterans. As you saw, veterans are no longer exempt from the ABOD. So we got some real challenges here. So I want to introduce Sarah Sherman. Sarah is Director of Strategic Partnerships at the state of Maine, Bureau of Veterans Affairs. She's a good friend and is committed to our veterans, and we're so glad to have her here. So she's going to give us some information on veterans and resources that they can utilize. Sarah?
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Sarah Sherman, and I serve as the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the Maine Bureau of Veteran Services. The Bureau serves as the state of Maine's advocate for veterans and their families. We're not the VA, but we often work closely with them. Tonight, I'd like to discuss changes to the SNAP program, the impact of them on Maine's veterans, and resources that are currently available to help veterans and their families. Next slide, please. Currently, there are over 104 veterans living in the state of Maine, and we are ranked 5th in the nation for veterans per capita. Out of 104,000 veterans, 5,600 statewide receive SNAP benefits. That's 5.4 of Maine's veteran population. The SNAP program is for veterans of all ages and discharge statuses, including recently separated from the U.S. military, disabled, or homeless. And their household income generally must meet state and federal eligibility requirements. Veterans must meet state-specific income and asset limits with special considerations for veterans over age 60 or with disabilities. And lower net income rules at or below the poverty line apply. And there are other program requirements that can be reviewed at the DHS Program Services Food Supplements website. For combat veterans, any combat pay, hostile fire pay, or imminent danger pay does not count as income when applying for SNAP benefits. Veterans who receive an annual benefit letter from the VA can utilize this document to provide proof of disability when applying for SNAP benefits. The Bureau's staff are trained to offer resources to help veterans who identify as food insecure. Our advocacy includes connection to food pantries and soup kitchens, Meals on Wheels, USDA food boxes through regional community action programs, 211 Maine, the Maine Air and Army National Guard's Family Program, the Maine Department of Health and Human Services, Spectrum Generations, and other veterans service organizations. Recent changes to SNAP will affect Maine's veterans in the following 4 ways. The first is the removal of the exemption from work requirements. The passage of H.R. 1, which is a major federal budget and reconciliation bill that was passed in July 2025, enacted sweeping changes to U.S. spending, taxes, and social programs like SNAP and Medicaid, reducing federal health care spending, cutting food assistance, adding work requirements, and altering tax policies for individuals and businesses. This changed veterans' eligibility to participate in SNAP, meaning if a veteran is an able-bodied adult without dependents, they are no longer automatically exempt from program time limits and work requirements. Unless veterans qualify for another exemption, such as a qualifying disability or being over age 65, they must now prove they are working, volunteering, or participating in job training for at least 80 hours a month to receive SNAP benefits for more than 3 months in a 3-year period. These changes were implemented on November 1st, 2025. The second change is a potential for benefit reductions. Changes to the basis for calculating SNAP benefits, an increase in the state's administrative cost requirements, and possibly paying for SNAP benefits and other changes could result in cut to all households that receive SNAP benefits over time. The third is increased strain on support services. These changes are expected to increase demand for local food pantries and nonprofit organizations, which already report high demand for basic need assistance. And lastly, state-level financial pressure. As mentioned above, H.R. 1 shifts some costs, such as administrative and potentially benefit costs, to states, which could lead to further reductions in eligibility or benefits in the future, and has been described by Maine officials as a cost the state cannot afford. If you're aware of any veterans who's experiencing food insecurity, please refer him or her to the Maine Bureau of Veterans Services. And I'd like to add one comment that isn't in my speech. Every year, the Maine Bureau of Veterans Services co-hosts Maine Homeless Veterans Stand Down. And obviously at these events, which we hold 4 across the state, food insecurity is a real issue, and we provide non-perishable foods and other organizations help. But what I'd like the audience to understand is that at my work, food insecurity is an issue every day. We are receiving requests on a weekly basis for help accessing food. So this change in SNAP can be dramatic to our Maine veterans, and I'd like to thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Sarah. I also have to, before she sits down, many of y'all may have also heard about a free dental program that allows veterans to get free dental work. Sarah Sherman has worked very closely with Delta Dental to make that happen. So Sarah is to be congratulated for her tremendous commitment to our veterans in the state of Maine for that as well. So thank you, Sarah, very much. I also, I'm a veteran myself. I volunteer at the Togus VA. In addition, I volunteer at the Red Cross, military, and I also have some military friends, veterans organizations, Veterans Forward, Brian Cummings, Dave Patch, Ed Bagoni, as well. So if you're a veteran, feel free to hit them up as later on today as well, this evening. So we're going to move forward. Colleen Frawley from Full Place, Full Potential is going to come up and give us some more information.
So Full Place, Full Potential works to end childhood food insecurity, particularly by focusing on federal nutrition programs like school meals. So I'm going to talk about the child hunger need in the state and how SNAP and any reductions in SNAP are actually a cut to school meals. But we've heard a lot in the news about children's health, about children's nutrition right? And to put in perspective, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the public health crisis that is food insecurity, particularly for children. So food insecurity is a massive public health problem, and it costs Americans $179 billion in health, education, and related costs annually, and children are the most at risk for any gap in food and nutrition. And this just shows some of the breakdown for where those costs come from. A lot of children's health and chronic disease comes from food insecurity and a gap in nutrition. So the impact of federal nutrition programs is huge for children across the country and in Maine. As we saw when the shutdown happened, we heard a lot about SNAP, and 1 month alone, SNAP dollars bring in approximately $29 million in federal funding to Maine. School food is a $23.5 billion industry in the US, and here in Maine, it's a $98.8 million industry in Maine. So you won't find another restaurant or that brings in that much money or serves that much food to anyone in Maine. The U.S. government spends $142 billion on food and nutrition programs. In contrast, the largest food charity spends and donates $5 billion, right? There is no amount of charity in Maine that can fill the meal gap that we already have, or that can even come close to filling the future meal gap when families lose SNAP benefits. So we know what works, and Maine has been a leader in what works. Universal school meals policy, feed kids. Here in Maine, we have a universal school meals policy, which means everyone, and not everyone knows this, right? If you don't have kids in school, even when you have kids, it took me a while to realize that I wasn't getting hit with the bill anymore, that I kept missing online and realizing that my kids had lunch debt because I was behind and going in and filling it out. And Representative Stover talked about the stigma when people can't afford food. And the reason that Maine passed this law was during the pandemic, it became so clear how many children were relying on their schools to eat in Maine, and they were now home. And school nutrition directors and workers were driving around the state on school buses to feed Maine kids in a way that was visible where it had not been visible before. And so at the time, the legislature, with bipartisan support, fully committed that Maine would make it so that every child could eat at school without having to pay a bill or pay a debt. So we make up the gap from the state revenue and what we don't get in federal school meal costs. So universal school meal policies, they reduce food insecurity and they improve health. And we're starting to see lots of research on that because there are now 8 states in the country that have them, where they reduce, chronic disease, blood pressure. They are usually and often the healthiest meals, not children, but many children will eat in a day. So just to put it in perspective, our schools serve 29 million plus meals annually, which is a lot of food. That includes breakfast and lunch. So the impact of federal cuts is millions of dollars from SNAP in Maine. So there's an approximation that 100,000 Maine families could lose some or all of their SNAP benefits over the coming years. Cuts to SNAP and Maine Care are cuts to school meals. Children are approved or deemed eligible for free school lunch on the federal level automatically when they qualify for SNAP or Maine Care, because the income eligibility, right? If your family meets the need for SNAP or Maine Care, then they meet the federal law need for free or reduced lunch. So that means your school gets the highest rate from the federal government per your lunch, which is not very high, right? It's about $5 for a tray, which includes labor, food, everything per meal. So we make up the rest. So if kids lose SNAP, they no longer have the federal dollars to pay for their meal. So the school needs to figure out how to pay for their meal. It also means they lose summer SNAP, which is called summer EBT, and they possibly lose eligibility for after school or summer meal programs, which means if enough kids lose SNAP in Booth Bay, then maybe we're no longer eligible for the Y to serve summer meals in the same way they have. So there's this knock-on effect that is coming down the pike, unfortunately. So no one can fill the gap. For every 9 meals that SNAP buys, food pantries, according to themselves, can supply 1. For every $1 spent of food by charity, the government spends 21 now. So Maine school meals programs won't be able to make up the meal gap as hunger increases outside of school and SNAP cuts impact their budgets. And the reality is that schools will still feed kids, right? They're going to keep feeding kids. So that money has to come from somewhere. And when it's not in the federal budget, and if Maine can no longer afford to make up the difference, it's going to come from somewhere, which leads down to your property taxes. Now, this is a short video. It's school nutrition directors talking about their fears around their programs.
Obviously, there are a handful of students that you know when they come to school, that's going to be the best meal they get during the day. So those are the ones that you're worried about with them losing this benefit.
Probably the biggest impact will be on the family unit. Children carry that burden. They see when their parents are struggling.
Free school meals helps families at every level. It takes that burden of the grocery bill off of them so they can pay for housing, they can pay for transportation, they can pay their medical bills. You know, the more meals we can give them, the better. We can't do nights and weekends and school vacations, and SNAP can step in there.
I do worry about long-term school meals for all.
It's not a great feeling to be in this kind of tenuous place where you're really not sure about the future of your program.
Losing these SNAP benefits and these SNAP dollars really is going to affect our programs and all the wonderful things that we've been able to do. I just can't fully comprehend why these basic human rights are being taken away from people. The right to food, the right healthcare, I mean, you name it. We are America and we're supposed to be the most, robust country, and we have starving children and starving adults, and it's disheartening.
I was just up in Aroostook County, and I just spent time with an elementary school nutrition director who was in tears talking about a 4-year-old who's in a pre-K program who had to go to their version of the Y, the rec center, for a few days to get one-on-one services. So they realized after 3 days that the 4-year-old hadn't eaten at home or at school because he'd missed breakfast and lunch. And so they realized that this 4-year-old hadn't eaten anything in 3 days because he hadn't been in the cafeteria. So of course they fed him. But we hear these stories all the time from schools, and they are really our biggest service provider when it comes to dealing with children and family hunger.
Thank you, Colleen, and I think you can see by Colleen's comments, we are facing some real challenges in the state. The good thing is that we have elected leaders here today who are here to listen to you, including the speaker, which we're very grateful for him to be here tonight. Speaker Ryan Fectow is serving his second non-consecutive term as Speaker of the House and fifth non-consecutive term in the Maine House of Representatives, representing part of his hometown of Biddeford. During his first term as Speaker of the House, he was the youngest presiding officer in the United States, and he is the first openly gay speaker in Maine's history. Fectow has spent 2 years working on housing issues, as well as many other issues, including food, both with Avesta Housing and Governor's Office of Policy Innovation and the Future. He's a dedicated advocate for working families, healthcare access, and economic development. And he's been a key figure in efforts to improve state's housing policies and promote sustainable growth. His leadership is defined by a deep commitment to service, unity, and the people of Maine. Speaker Fectow graduated from Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. He's the son and grandson of French Canadian immigrants and was raised by a single mother, which I deeply respect and connect with you on that, as I am a product of the single mom as well. He's the first member of his family to graduate from college. He and his husband reside in Biddeford, near his childhood home. And I certainly agree with the last that he has two mostly well-behaved dogs, because I have two that are never behaved at all. So I'm very proud and honored to introduce Speaker Fectow to provide some comments and talk about his legislation on things moving forward. So thank you very much for being here, Speaker.
Thank you.
You want to click?
I actually don't have any clicks
No,
to
you
do.
can't.
All right, I'll do it. Yeah.
Well, thank you to Representative Stover, Senator Rennie, for all of you to for putting this together, and for all of you being here this evening. You know, before I dive into policy, I think it's important to speak about my own personal experience and why this issue matters so much to me. Representative Stover's heard this story before. I've shared it many times, but as was mentioned, I grew up with a single mom who dropped out of high school after her freshman year and had kids when she was very young. My parents got divorced, and we lived on SNAP benefits. And I think the thing that's important to note in this entire conversation, which I find a little funny in the context of all the conversation politicians in Washington have had about how expensive it is to go to the grocery store, SNAP benefits don't cover all the food you need to buy for your families. These programs are very, very important, but my family did not just rely on SNAP benefits. My family relied on a lot of other things to help us put food on the table. And one of those things that stands out in my memory very vividly is one night my mom got a phone call from a friend who had found out that the J.J. Nissen plant in Biddeford was giving out expired food, you know, expired for the shelf, but still good. And they had like all this food they were giving away. And I remember we drove up to the factory with milk crates and filled it with all sorts of stuff, Hostess pastries. And I remember going to the refrigerator for like the next month and opening it up, and we had just all these fruit pies, you know, like the really bad ones with the really bad stuff inside. But I thought we were finally there, like we finally had reliable source of food, because I had for so long experienced just like the constant stress in my mom of trying to put food on the table for me and my sister. And so I thought it was really great that we had all those fruit pies. As an adult, looking at the nutritional label, probably not the best thing in the world, but that's what motivates me around this work. I also want to share that last summer I was here in Booth Bay, and Representative Stover, I was picking her up to drive her to doors during this election cycle, and there was a man who approached our vehicle. He's speaking Spanish. I got to put my very elementary Spanish skills to use, trying to figure out what he was asking about. And we eventually realized he was trying to figure out where the refrigerator, the food fridge was located. And Representative Stover, of course, quickly, you know, showed him where it was, and we went in, and it was just amazing to see this relief and also this surprise that this food was available to him. And he was clearly someone who was here in Booth Bay, probably working as like a landscaper, providing a service to the community to make sure properties that probably are serving tourists looked good. And here's someone who is food insecure, and a resource is available in this community. And I want to tip my hat to Representative Stover and the work you do, and everyone in this community for doing it. So that brings us to LD 2122 that I put forward this legislative session, which is focused on trying to respond to the best of our ability to the impacts of HR 1. I think the thing that's good, you know, I think it's important to be clear about, I think the presentation you just saw with the $21 in federal or government funds to $1. The challenge we face as a state is there's just probably no way we are going to be able to backfill every single federal dollar that we're losing as a result of HR 1 as it relates to food assistance and several other programs that are being truly decimated by the passage of this law. But what we're going to try to do is be as responsive as we can be. And one thing that I'm looking at through this law is trying to deal with this issue of the error rate, which was explained earlier way more eloquently than I could have possibly explained it. But Maine is in the top tier of the error rate right now by 0.26%. So we're getting the highest hit against what we receive from the federal government in SNAP by just 0.25%. And we have a year or so to try to reduce our error rate in order to make sure we mitigate the impacts of HR1 on our state. And one way other states have been able to mitigate their error rates is by utilizing and leveraging technology to make sure that people who receive a pay increase at work are communicating that they got a pay increase, even if that pay increase does not impact their eligibility. They still remain eligible for SNAP benefits, but they have to make sure that they communicate a pay increase to the Department of Health and Human Services. So things like these are the things we want to try to deal with through this bill and using technology as a resource, as other states have, in reducing their error rate. And hopefully we'll be able to do it. Hopefully we'll reduce it. I'm very optimistic, but hopefully we can reduce it without having any of the impacts that were explained earlier. The second thing that this bill will do is allocate $87 million, which it covers 3 months of SNAP. I think we all learned a few months ago when the government shutdown occurred how devastating it is to lose SNAP benefits. Just the stories of people who were on the brink of not knowing whether or not they were going to be able to put any food on the table for their families. And then subsequently, the impact and the hysteria amongst food pantries and food banks that were suddenly going to be trying to supplant the entire SNAP benefit at their local food pantry. It was just total chaos. And the goal of this bill is to at least have a bridge should something happen in the future that provides some cushion to these impacts. January 30th is just around the corner. I'm guessing no one in here thinks the government will pass something to fund the government before January 30th, but we could face another government shutdown in just a few days. And if we have one that lasts as long as the last one, I suspect we will see some of the same impacts that we were anticipating during the last 42-day shutdown. And we want to make sure we do everything we can in Maine to be proactive and to make sure Maine families, children, seniors, veterans are able to access food, which is just fundamental to life. Like, we just need to make sure people have food. I think that's a basic tenet of what we are supposed to do as public servants and as those who are looking out for one another. I think that's who Maine people are. I think we showed that during the shutdown and how quickly people organized and stepped up to the plate. But we need to make sure we're doing it permanently and ongoing. So this bill will have a public hearing scheduled already? Not yet. When it does, we'll make sure Representative Stover knows and Senator Rennie and spread the information. And if you are interested in testifying in support of the bill, more than welcome your input and your support. So thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for being here again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Really, really appreciate that and appreciate your commitment to trying to find a solution. I think, we can all debate why things happened, what happened, but the bottom line is HR1 passed, it's in effect, and it's up to us as a state and individuals and communities to handle the implications of that. So I think that's what we're trying to do here tonight. I want to thank everybody. We're going to go ahead and open it up for Q&As. Please feel free to step up. If you don't want to step up, we have cards, 3x5 cards, but please, we welcome questions, comments, thoughts, any ideas, anything that you all may want to share.
I have a question for Colleen around the school issue. If families lose their SNAP benefit during the school year, do you know if schools are going to be required to continually look at that eligibility? It's hard enough to do it in the fall. as a former school food service director?
Well, that is a good question. I was going to say, you must have worked in school nutrition. So we, because of the direct certification here now that Maine does use Maine Care and SNAP to qualify kids, and CEP, which is another technical rule that it makes is how schools are funded for food. If you've heard anything, these programs are extremely technical and there are many laws managing them, so they are certainly not a free-for-all like we often hear in the news. So school nutrition directors run their programs like little businesses within the school, and they don't get money from the school budget, so they manage this federal budget and everything, and their purchasing and everything else. If the students are directly certified for the year, they, as of now, they stay on the roll for that school year in the ISP. So we're encouraging schools to constantly update their direct certification right now while that all holds.
Thanks, Colleen. And I think one of the things to also talk about is that Colleen had mentioned that some of the other programs, we're talking SNAP here tonight. There's also Medicaid and other changes coming down the pike as well that our state is going to have to deal with as well. So we're talking about one issue that has been changed. So thank you for that question. Really appreciate it, because it is a direct certification, and now school students, right, parents are going to have to fill out the forms, and it just makes it much more difficult. So any other questions? Any other thoughts?
Thanks, everyone. I'm Ed Golanini, the Executive Director of Easter Seals in Maine. I don't know who can answer this question, and it's a bit open-ended around work requirements, which are now the law of the land for SNAP and other things. Are there efforts in Maine now to look at, because at 2.4% unemployment, there's not a lot of jobs, right? That's not a bad unemployment number if you look nationally. The other pipes are paid job training, volunteer. Can someone comment, who's on the government side, elected or otherwise, around what pipes are going to be opened to provide opportunities? If it's the law, and if someone's required to work and they can't get a job because there aren't jobs, what do those pipes look like, and what roles can community-based organizations like Easter Seals play in opening them up?
So for the work requirements, if you're subject to them, you must work 80 hours a month. And how you meet that requirement, and I say work, but there's a lot of different things that you can do. You can work, you can volunteer, you can go to a training program. Some states have workfare. I don't think Maine has that. But you can do a combination of those things. And so I think that Easter Seals may be able to provide some slots for people. I would encourage you to work with the state agency on that. And I don't know, Colleen, if you wanted to add something.
So we're a SNAP outreach contractor with the department, with DHHS, as is Good Shepherd Food Bank, and this is relatively new in Maine. So I just asked this same question of DHHS because we have employment and training places, but we don't have enough for that, for that many people. And essentially Goodwill is really one of the only right now. So the state is always looking for new organizations to be in that role. And there are a couple different ways you can do it. There's the volunteer, but then there's the contracted employment and training, and I can afterwards give you the contact of who to contact and get involved in that. And that is actually part of a push, like indirectly, of this bill, is to boost the capacity of those like small SNAP outreach organizations, so that we can improve things like that and engage with veterans in different communities. Because again, it's confusing and it's hard to know where to go, and it's not easy to find the information, and the more it changes, the more confusing it is. And because it's a personal issue that has a lot of stress around it, if you have a trusted community partner or someone like Holly's organization, right, the Navigator, people know her, so they're comfortable talking about these really personal challenges their families facing. So it's great to have an organization like Easter Seals or Good Shepherd or whoever, where someone can go and get that information confidentially and someone can help people go through that process.
Thanks, Colleen. I think that's a great point, and I think one of the big things, thank Good Shepherd and the other partners here, we need to be partners. We need to, talk to your local organizations, let them know what's coming down the pike. Let's start asking questions, contact your elected representatives and full plates, full potentials and others and understand what's coming down the pike. So really appreciate that, talking about the partnerships, Colleen. I'm going to go ahead and ask a question that I received before. And the question is this: what are changes for able-bodied adults, and can providers submit letters around disability or inability to work, which is, as we know, is an exemption? So I'm going to give that to Elizabeth, and Colleen, you can chime in as well.
So we talked about a lot of the changes already. It's essentially who is subject to the work requirements. That's the biggest change. But keep in mind also there's the error rate issue in the backdrop. So there could also be a lot more documentation that those that are subject to the work requirements is going to need to provide in order to make sure that they are complying. So those are kind of the big things that changed with the law. But in terms of providers supporting unfitness for work, that if you have a knowledge of a person's ability to, say, if you're an ENT provider and you realize this person is not a good fit for this job, they're not physically or mentally capable, you can certainly be somebody who's providing that contact information, that collateral contact to the state agency. So it's really important for the partner agencies to help with communication, to communicate to the recipients what the new requirements are, to make sure that they know what they're supposed to do in order to stay on the program, but also to serve in these different roles. I think there's a big important role for all those kinds of agencies.
In Maine, a licensed provider can, there's a form, or you can submit a letter as the economy has changed. And I work more than one job. And so it's hard to always be reporting that. And so some of the automatic technology for income and gig work and stuff would make that a lot easier to make sure that you are complying with that. But there is room for improvement in this in Maine in general. But Maine has made it as easy as possible in the past for people to get their food benefit, right? And that's been the legislature's point of view and the administration's point of view, at least for the last while. And so this is a change for people, and it's a cultural change, and we have to make the system as easy as possible, which is part of what's in the speaker's bill, thankfully. But that's what we're working on too.
This one is for Senator Rennie and Representative Stover. I was wondering if you could just talk about and maybe explain to people how this issue with the SNAP benefits, what that domino effect is going to look like. And for somebody like Senator Rennie, who's worked on making childcare more affordable, how if a family can't afford food, then they're not going to be able to afford childcare because now their budget's all messed up. And just as a business owner in Booth Bay Harbor, I think if you are someone who can afford food, there are going to be so many more people in this community when they don't have SNAP benefits. They're not going to be able to afford food, and then your business could suffer. So it is not just the people that are receiving these benefits, it is the entire country. And maybe you could talk more on that, Senator Rennie.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a few pieces to the question/request to comment. One of which was a piece that Representative Stover had touched on before, which is when people have access to SNAP in order to purchase food for them and their families to survive, they are going to local businesses, local grocery stores. It's a piece of the economy that we can't ignore. And my guess is if you're here tonight or if you're watching this, you either are a recipient of SNAP benefits or you know someone who is a recipient of SNAP benefits. And even if you think you don't know anybody who receives SNAP benefits, I promise you, you do. You do. So that is absolutely a big piece of it. The other pieces that you mentioned had to do with both how it's going to affect people on in their own homes, in their own lives, the effects of that on human beings, which of course is significant. If you have X amount of money to get by, we all know this, it's budgeting 101. If you need more money just to pay for food to keep yourself and your family alive and healthy, that money has to come from somewhere. It doesn't come from nowhere. So a lot of really difficult decisions are gonna have to be made, and they're gonna have to be made on the state level as well. Representative Stover and I both serve on the Appropriations Committee. So when these federal dollars are taken away and these important and utilized programs don't have enough money, that money has to come from somewhere. So there's going to be a lot of really difficult decisions being made in people's families as well as by us at the state, which is part of why we wanted to get some input. Would you like to add anything?
I would just add that as we see the impact of the federal cuts down to the state, and as we see that impact our local economy, which is what you mentioned, I think about Hannaford across the street that employs an awful lot of people. And if the Hannaford isn't getting the same amount of revenue every month, which we know that in the summer, we all know, we've all been to Hannaford in the summer and here, and it's like Disney World in there. And then this happens. Now we're in January, and there could be 6 cars at Hannaford. Well, imagine if we take out, a percentage of those people. We take out a quarter. We take out a third of the people who would be shopping there because they no longer have that benefit. What's going to happen to our little grocery store across the street? And what is going to be the financial impact? And what does that mean for people who can get 40 hours plus overtime in the summer, who work there, who now suddenly have 20 hours or even less? And then they, if they're no longer eligible because their work hours have been cut below that 20 hours a week or 80 a month, what is going to happen to them? So I look at multiple levels, and we all know reliable childcare is a requirement if you're going to go to work. You have to have childcare to go to work. And if you can't afford your childcare, how are you going to go to work? So we have to think really systemically, almost like a pebble in a pond, the circles around this and where that impact is going to be. We know, for instance, people who are self-employed, every time there's a snow day, it's a big emergency because you got to find somebody to watch the kids, because when you're self-employed, you don't typically use childcare if your children are school age, and now there's no school. Who's going to watch the kids? So I worry about families and heating costs. Yes, we have a fuel fund here in the Booth Bay region, but across the state, LIHEAP benefit is lower than it was last year. You have to add up all these things. We're fortunate we have a wood bank. We have the woodchucks here in Booth Bay. That's amazing, but not everybody has a wood bank. But all these things are going to, it's like a pebble in a pond. They're going to ripple out, and it's going to affect childcare. It's going to affect work. It's going to affect whether or not you can afford to put tires on your car and register your car. Can you pay your rent? Can you heat your home? How are you going to do all these things? And it probably sounds to some people naive that food insecurity and cut to SNAP benefit is going to start to have a ripple effect on your entire household budget, but it is. It absolutely is. And it's going to have a ripple effect into our workforce. And that isn't just in who sells us the groceries across the street, it's who on the farms, even across Maine. We have a section at Hannaford of farm produce. We have a farmer's market. We also have a farm stand here in town who take EBT. Well, if you don't have that anymore, and Brown's Farm Stand isn't going to be able to take it, and the farmer's market on Thursdays isn't going to be able to take it, what is going to happen to them? So the impact is going to hit all of us. And who's going to be able to afford to go out to dinner? Maybe they're not going to be able to go. So it's going to take all of us, but it's very complex.
Let me also add, and I really appreciate that, and I can follow up with you. There's another, real quick, I'll get to that question. There's another administrative issue that is going on. USDA has also called for increased SNAP stocking rule. What that means is that small stores and independent, the small stores that Senator Rennie and Rep. Stover talked about, will have to increase their inventory. This rule was it was almost put in place in 2019, but it was beat down and put back because of the increased cost on small retailers. So the increase to carry more product and more activity. So it's not only SNAP recipients, but it's businesses as well who are being asked to do more as well. In addition, they have to go ahead and pay for their point of system to be able to do that as well. So happy to chat with you a little more. So it's not only individuals, it is businesses that are also having to take steps to deal with SNAP changes as well. So I think we had a question over there. Yeah, please.
One of the other groups that we haven't really talked about are people who have left their work in order to stay home and take care of a spouse or a disabled person. And if that doesn't count as work, and people have already lost a significant amount of their income because they're choosing to do that, that's going to be a real double wham on those families.
Good. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I would say that is a reason to be exempt from the SNAP work requirements, but you're going to have to be able to show that to the state. You're going to have to show that that person is caring for somebody that is not able to be by themselves. So you have some sort of caregiving responsibilities.
And is that like signing an affidavit, or what will be, like, what's the proof?
Well, so I think in the past there's been a willingness to accept self-attestation by the individual. And so the question is whether states, not just in Maine, but across the country, are going to be able to do that, considering what they're trying to do with the error rates. So, that's sort of wait and see.
Hi, I work with survivors of domestic violence, and the current change to no longer allow homelessness as, one of those able-bodied working has really changed people's ability to access food. So in the past, we have been able, as part of the agency working with survivors, to submit a letter stating that they're homeless and working with us. And that allowed them to get back on their feet and receive food stamp benefits. Many of these people are leaving with just the clothes on their back, their children, and maybe their pets. So 3 months of getting food stamp benefits as an able-bodied person is not enough time for someone with absolutely nothing to be able to meet their needs and get to work. What was asked of us was a letter from a therapist or practitioner.
It's a license, yeah.
There's a 6-month at least wait list to get someone who has just fled domestic violence into therapy. They have not been on a therapy wait list for the past year. That was not even something that they could do in their current circumstance. So I feel like this is really leaving a huge hole for survivors with and without children who have just fled.
It is a reality of this that there are exemptions that are no longer there. I wonder if there is some room prior to this full exemption of homelessness. FNS had a policy that said that if somebody was chronically homeless, so we were trying to really narrow that definition. You were just sort of surfing from couch to couch, but you were deemed somebody who was in a shelter or was not chronically without housing, that the state was able to give an exception for that. I don't know what the state's policy is. Many states are revisiting some of those other policies prior to 2023 when these exemptions were in place. So there might be room there, but I can't make any promises for sure. It's just a reality of what's going on with this law.
To what extent could it be tied into the not able to work part, like because
yes,
I mean someone who's
unfit for work.
Unfit.
The question was, could you categorize that as unfit for work because of your circumstances? And again, that's a question for the state, but I think there's room for that there, because certainly not being ready to work every day, being homeless is certainly part of it. And that I go back to that memo, I believe it was around 2015 where FNS put it in place, which talks about chronically homeless as a criteria. So something to explore.
I'm not really sure, but historically we had a hardship exemption for victims of domestic violence. And I don't know where that stands and if that would correlate, but something we could look into.
Yeah.
But historically, OFI was able to use hardship exemptions for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and commercial sex trafficking because of the situation. If it's not, then we should have those discussions internally.
And it's a good point about, it needs to be a licensed professional. So anyone who's licensed by Maine, which can be a social worker if there's a case manager, and that's often the case for homeless services. I'm not, there could be a problem or a gap with OFI, and that if that's an issue and it didn't work, then I obviously can't speak to that, and we can follow up. But a licensed social worker, anyone licensed by the state of Maine can vouch for things like that with OFI. They want to be able to do it. It's just whether or not they'll still be able to have the kind of humanity that they were always able to use when now they're under more pressure to get the error rate down. Is this knock-on effect like we were hearing about before?
Next up, real quick, local, feel free, donate. Local food pantries and food banks do tremendous work. And then also opportunity to get involved, share information, share your stories, raise the community awareness, be involved, be active, engage your wonderful members here that you have. Senator Rennie, Rep. Stover, the Speaker, really appreciate it. And so any other questions before I turn it over to Senator Rennie for closing remarks?
Thank all of you who managed to make it out here on this cold January Monday evening. It is very much appreciated. If any of you at home are watching this, thanks for trying to get some more information. That's great. If you at home or here have anything that you want your elected officials to know, myself, Senator Rennie, or Representative Stover, if you're here on the beautiful Boothbay Peninsula, please reach out to us. Please reach out to us. We have legislative emails. We have very accessible information. Just Google us. It'll be fine. But really, thank you all so much for coming. And Representative Stover had to step out just briefly, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that, yes, please donate to that community fridge and Community Resource Council on her behalf. They do amazing work in food security and a variety of other issues in the local area. So thank you all.